Okay, well, good morning and welcome to the Korea Economic Institute. My name is Scott Snyder. I'm President and CEO of KEI, and very pleased to have both our in-person and virtual audience join us today for discussion of South Korea's new president and prospects for U.S.-Korea relations, a view from ambassadors. We have a very distinguished panel of former ambassadors of the United States to South Korea to discuss this moment in U.S.-Korea relations following the election of Lee Jae-myung as the 21st president of South Korea, and also the significance of the election itself and at this moment for Korea and Korea's future direction. I'd like to think that KEI is kind of the institutional home for former ambassadors because we have this really signature project at KEI that captures captures the memoirs of many former ambassadors, including two on this panel, and no pressure, Ambassador Goldberg, but hopefully one on the way, where ambassadors contribute their memoirs of their professional and personal experience in Korea, and we've done that from both sides. And so I just want to mention that book because we are hopeful to also have those contributions online as well soon, available for download. So today we have, no further ado, and I'm not going to do long introductions, but mainly just introduce the ambassadors and their times in office in Korea. To my immediate left, Kathleen Stephens, who was ambassador between 2008 and 2011. So that would have been President Obama and President Lee Myung-bak. To her left, we have Philip Goldberg, most recent prior ambassador at the time of Yoon Suk-yeol and President Biden. And then Harry Harris, coming to us online, ambassador of the U.S. to South Korea during the first Trump administration with the Moon administration. So why are we taking the measure of this moment beyond the fact that it is a new beginning and the launch of a new leadership in South Korea? In democracies, elections do several things. One, they provide an affirmation of the public will. Two, they confer legitimacy to an elected leader, and then it is the job of the leader to sustain that legitimacy through the implementation of the leader's promises to the people. And three, it provides a kind of fresh start and sense of direction and momentum. And so following the past months of political paralysis, and this may be the most important thing, Korea and Korea watchers can finally exhale as we adjust to a new direction and momentum in leadership. And so I want to start with the election campaign itself and the result of the three-way race for president, which resulted in a solid victory for Lee Jae-myung over two main rivals, Kim Moon-soo and minor candidate Lee Jun-suk. And we know that this was a snap election following the impeachment of Yoon Suk-yeol, so the campaign was conducted in only 60 days with Lee as the winner. Before we get to the new president, I just want to ask each of you for your reflections and observations on the campaign itself. And maybe I'll start, Kathy, with you, since you're closest to me.
Well, it's great to be back at KEI and see so many familiar faces, so thank you for the invitation. Maybe if you started with me, and I'm I'm probably the oldest too, but I mean the least recent former here, I will be a little bit, if you like, kind of historical and say I, of course, watched this election with great interest, and I think it was perhaps the most significant election for South Korea, and certainly in terms of implications for its democracy, since 1987, which I now hasten to say I was in Korea for the 1987 election as a political officer at the American Embassy, and it was a very tumultuous and very impressive time. I would say there's one other election I would highlight as being very important, and that, of course, is 1997, the election of Kim Dae-jun, because that was in the election where, for the first time, there was a peaceful transfer of power to the opposing party. But in any event, clearly we saw Korea's democracy under great pressure. Not the only democracy in the world under great pressure these days, but under great pressure over the last 6 months. And I think we saw a process, an election that revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of Korea's democracy and its political system. And perhaps the last presidential, I would say not the last presidential election in Korea, but the last one under the current constitution, because one of the commitments of the new president is to change the constitution. But in any event, without starting off too long here, I mean, what are some of the observations or the strengths and weaknesses I see? A couple things. One is I thought it was notable that the two candidates, the two major candidates, Mr. Lee and Mr. Kim, were both former governors. And it reminded me that in 1987, in addition to direct presidential elections, and by the way, Kim Moon-soo, the conservative candidate, was in jail during that election because he had been jailed for demonstrating to get direct presidential elections in 1987. Here he is all these years later, so running for the Conservative Party, losing the election, but acquiescing and recognizing his opponent's victory with grace. But here he is running for election, but running coming out of being governor of Gyeonggi province. So what I was going to start to say earlier was in 1987, one of the other promises was local autonomy. It took many years for local autonomy to happen. That happened many years after direct elections. And here you have two politicians, sometimes not a favorable word in the United States, but two practiced politicians running against each other. So I think the rise of local autonomy has been important. At the same time, I think we've seen some of the weaknesses which have been long commented on in Korea of the political party system. And those are probably particularly notable right now in the Conservative Party, which I think as it recovers from this loss has its challenges ahead of it. But I think we see other things in terms of the weaknesses of Korean democracy that we see throughout the world. I mean, the polarization, the issues of inequality, rising, generational differences. It seems like generational has become more important than regional differences in some way in Korea. And of course, the role of media and I think sometimes accelerating the polarization. But in any event, overall, I would say coming out of this election, we have to acknowledge, or I would certainly acknowledge, an 80% turnout, very impressive. And the fact that the acceptance of the results, as has been true since 1987, when, again, having been there, the winner won with 37% of the vote. And it was a deeply divided time. But even in that time, the results were acknowledged, and Roh Tae-woo went on to a very consequential and historic presidency.
I'm going to ask you, Ambassador Goldberg, to build on that, but then maybe also say something about President Lee's own political background itself, because I'm sure you had opportunities to meet with him. He has a history of having been coming from a working class family background, former human rights lawyer, mayor of Sumnang City, as Kathy mentioned, governor of Gyeonggi province, major Democratic Party leader, and now president. So how do you see the campaign and how do you see the person?
Well, thanks, Scott, for the invitation. And the campaign, I think, was a tribute to Korean democracy, an 80% turnout, as Kathy mentioned. It was a solid win, as you said, Scott, for Lee Jae-myung, but at the same time, he didn't reach the 50% threshold, which means there's still a lot of polarization, opposition. The other two candidates combined had slightly more than he had, which will be an interesting issue as he goes about governing. Does that mean that his attempts at unifying Korea will be his main theme, or will some of these issues that are hangovers from the Yoon Suk-yeol period about investigations and in some ways retribution going to be more of the theme? That's what we'll be looking for, I think, as in terms of Korean domestic politics as we move forward. Lee Jae-myung is a hugely interesting figure. He came from poverty, very, very tough poverty in the south of Korea, went to work in a factory as dropping out of middle school. Went on to make himself into a lawyer and a human rights lawyer, a labor lawyer, and a very, very, once he got to his second election, successful politician as a mayor, a governor, then as leader of the Democratic Party and a member of the Assembly. So he's a tough-minded and a very able politician. At the same time, he has a history of statements and the rest that in some ways will be what will be following also as he moves forward, whether he is going to follow a path that he described in the end of 2024 and the campaign of support for the alliance and support for the trilateral with Japan. Those in some ways contradict his past positions, and so we'll be watching that very closely.
And Ambassador Harris, I want to turn to you for any additional comments on the campaign or the person, Lee Jae-myung, and his the attributes that we're most likely to see on display as he takes the presidency.
Yeah, thanks, Scott, and it's great to be on a panel, albeit virtually, with Ambassadors Stephens and Goldberg. I also want to offer my congratulations to Lee Jae-myung for his victory. I think it's significant, but the whole process underscores for me the strength and resilience of Korean democracy, which I think is a good thing, and all the folks that were running should take pride in that, as well as the Korean people. I wish we had elections that only lasted, election campaigns that only lasted 60 days. But I guess that's just the nature of our differences between us and Korea. Clearly, as Ambassador Goldberg said, now President Lee didn't win with the mandate, but he did win clearly. But I think if you consider his victory plus the supermajority that his party has in the National Assembly, it's clear sailing ahead for the things that the DP wants to commit to. So I'll also build on Ambassador Goldberg's comments. Lee Jae-myung's personal story is inspirational. We used to say that stuff like that could happen only in America, but that's not true. It happens in Korea as well. The Horatio Alger rags to riches story, which I think should serve to inspire a lot of folks across the political spectrum.
Yeah, and that particular point I think is interesting because so often presidents end up kind of using their stories, or their stories become emblematic of where a nation might be at a particular moment. And so I'm curious for all of you, what do you think are the elements of Lee's story that capture the moment that Korea is in right now as part of its own historical and political development role in the world? Maybe Kathy, do you want to start again, since you're closest to me?
I think Harry and Phil have outlined, Lee Jae-myung's extraordinary story. I've been thinking about it in terms of, I was reading that his family was from Gyeongsang Bukdo, I think, a small town outside of Andong, large family, which is very, and in the mid-1970s, they moved to Songnam, this new industrial city. I was in Korea in the 1970s as a Peace Corps volunteer, and I was thinking Lee Jae-myung would have been one of my middle school students in a boys' middle school that had 75 people in it. And I was in a rural area, and I know how hard it was for these kids to go to school and how hard families worked to send their kids to middle school. And Lee Jae-myung didn't even get to go to middle school. He went to a factory in Songnam. So yeah, it's a quintessentially Korean story, if you like, in this generation that he had the career he did. And in the 1980s, which I've already spoken about, being in Korea for those 6 years in the 1980s, I saw this great transformation. Lee Jae-myung, unlike Kim Moon-soo, was not an expellee from Seoul National University fighting for democracy. He was trying to get his degree after he'd gotten through middle school and high school, and been in the factory for years. So I think you see in this many sides of this. And by the way, I could talk about other people who are coming into the administration who all have incredible stories. And yet the other candidate in this, the third candidate in this election was a young man who was a toddler in the 80s and has a totally different experience. So I think it kind of sums up, if you like, I mean, this, again, we talk about it so lightly, but this very rapid change, we talk about the economic change, but also the political change in Korea. But Lee Jae-myung himself, I mean, and I have to be a little careful here, I'm not Korean, but what I kind of understand is, I mean, the story, which as Ambassador Harris said, is very inspiring. We respond to it as Americans, the bootstrapping, the incredible story. I think it's raised questions in Korea now about the role of kind of class and the sense of the elite and the sense of generational change. And, there are undercurrents there which also, I think, reflect Koreans today kind of saying and reflecting on the enormous kind of drama of the last 40 or 50 years, the political leaderships and the divides that it's created, and now a new generation which came forward, especially with martial law, to kind of say we need to care about our democracy too, but where does that lead us? So I think Lee Jae-myung has his work cut out for him. He's got a lot of people in Korea who are skeptical, notwithstanding this inspirational background, are skeptical of him.
I think Korea is a country of haves and have-nots in some ways, and he represents, and the way he came up is represents the have-nots, and has made a success of himself first by getting through school and getting his very tough-minded way with politics. If you watch Korean dramas, if you watch Parasite or Squid Game, it talks about these socioeconomic issues. And in some ways, he exemplifies that situation and has made a success of himself. We may see it through American eyes as Horatio Alger, but and Harry's right. But at the same time, this is a very Korean story that has a different kind of sense to it to me.
Ambassador Harris?
Yeah, I'll just add that I don't want to overstate the Horatio Alger analogy that I mentioned before. I think that the Korean people looked at the policies of all the candidates, all three candidates, and made their decision. It's less about identifying, if you will, with one candidate's background or another. It's more looking at the issues. That said, it's a nice story to have, and I think that without overplaying it, Lee Jae-myung played it well.
So Ambassador Goldberg has already referred to the kind of move to the center during the campaign that candidate Lee made, and now he's moving into the governance role. And he, again, in his inaugural speech, referenced his desire for a good relationship with the United States and his commitment to maintaining the U.S., Japan, South Korea trilateral relationship. But we haven't seen the phone call with President Trump yet. And so I'm wondering both if you think that President Lee's turn to the center will stick, and whether do you think the Trump administration can accept it? And I'm going to ask Ambassador Goldberg to start.
I think this is going to be the big challenge for Lee Jae-myung and his government in terms of their foreign policy, which is a balancing act in trying to repair some of the relationship with China and at the same time keep the alliance and the trilateral going as it has been. A lot of that will depend on Washington as opposed to what he tries to do. He did moderate during the campaign and before that and has said the right things, I think, about the alliance and about the trilateral. The fact that a phone call hasn't taken place, it might be taking place now for all I know, or tomorrow. And hopefully that will occur, and there'll be a meeting in not too long, maybe at the G7. But it is going to depend a lot on the issues that are coming forward also. First, one, whether President Lee likes it or not, is going to be the tariffs issue. Then it's going to be followed by issues having to do with the military and security relationship and perhaps reopening the SMA discussions, which we had while I was there, and an agreement that we reached, and troop levels, the idea of strategic flexibility, which has been raised especially at the Pentagon here, and the idea that all of our allies in Asia should be focused on the China threat, and while Korea is still focused very much on the North. But there are going to be areas too of agreement and of common goals, which may include North Korea, although that could involve a competition as well between President Trump and President Lee about who's first and how that's handled and whether there's coordination. But it's going to be a very, very difficult, I think, tightrope for President Lee to walk, given the issues involved and the reaction here in Washington, as perhaps reflected by the statement from the White House on his election and the phone call, depending on how it goes, and a future meeting.
Ambassador Harris?
Yeah, thanks. I agree with everything that Ambassador Goldberg said. I will emphasize that President Lee emphasized during his campaign a pragmatic approach to governing, pragmatic foreign policy and all of that. And he reiterated that during his inaugural speech, which is a positive. He emphasized the alliance and trilateral cooperation, which includes Japan. So I think both are significant. He clearly is going to face challenges, first on the economic front, not only his own country's economy, but tariffs with the United States, the tariffs issue, SMA, the Special Measures Agreement, the burden sharing that Ambassador Goldberg mentioned could come back again. And all of this will aim toward the G7 and then APEC, which Korea will host this fall. So there's an opportunity there to build to APEC in a positive way. I hope they take it. Clearly, his challenges are going to include North Korea, a nuclear North Korea that's now aligned with Russia, with advanced weapons for Russia, and as well as China. I think those taken together present an existential threat to South Korea, the like of which we've not seen before. So he's going to have to deal with that. He'll have to deal with an aggressive China that's posturing now in the Yellow Sea or West Sea. So the stuff that's happened in the past in the South China Sea has been for Korea perhaps theoretical, but now it's become practical in the West Sea, and China's moves in the PMZ, the Provisional Measures area, a Provisional Measures Zone in the West Sea. The agreement that Beijing and Seoul reached in 2001, that now China seems to be abrogating with its building of structures in the PMZ, as well as declaring a no-sail zone 2 weeks ago in the PMZ. So he's going to have to deal with an aggressive China that's right on his doorstep, literally. And then, as Ambassador Goldberg mentioned, there are the military issues that have come into play. The role of United Nations Command, OPCON transition with Combined Forces Command, and the issues of posture flexibility that's already been mentioned. So these are significant issues that he has inherited, and only time will tell how effective he is in dealing with them.
Master Stephens?
Yeah, well, I mean, Harry and Philip described well, the elements of what I would certainly regard, I think most of us do, as a geopolitical environment that has, to understate it, many challenges, and in particular for the Republic of Korea. This is not entirely new, but I think it is at a more severe point, if you like, at this moment when South Korea has been somewhat internally focused for the last some months, working on this getting through this domestic political crisis. So, I mean, with respect to your question about where Lee Jae-myung is kind of ideologically, or the party is ideologically, and particularly when it comes to foreign policy, I mean, I would only to add to this one, Lee Jae-myung does not have a lot of foreign policy experience. He was a mayor, he was a governor. You could say as governor, he was the move to Pyeongtaek, to Camp Humphreys happened under his watch. I mean, he certainly is not unfamiliar with these issues, but this is not his forte. Two, I would note that if we look over the way that successive administrations in Korea have dealt with some of these issues that have been mentioned, the Democratic Party as a whole, as a party, I would say, has moved to the center. This is not just Lee Jae-myung himself, but on foreign policy issues, certainly on the alliance, U.S. Alliance issues, there's been quite a change as public attitudes have changed, as Korea itself has changed. So I take Lee Jae-myung at his word as he laid out what his objectives are. I also think we need to look at how he assembles the team around him. I certainly welcome the fact that he's chosen as his national security advisor Lee Seung-nak, Ambassador Lee Seung-nak, who's a career diplomat. Of course, we like career diplomats, but served in Washington, has worked on the North Korea, and we like career officers. But served on North Korea, ambassador to Russia, very sound, thoughtful national security advisor. It's notable, I think, that he's nominated as his NIS chief, a longtime North Korea specialist from who served in the earlier in the Nomi-hun administration, I believe, Lee Jung-suk, and I think that is a signal, perhaps, that if there's going to be engagement with the North Koreas in the past, that maybe from the NIS, he'll be a voice that will bring some of that past experience to it. I mean, how that plays out with all these other things going on, I think remains to be seen, obviously. but I do think that Lee Jae-myung is coming to power at a time when I think he'd probably like to focus on some of, if you like, South Korea's domestic issues. I mean, certainly its economy, the growing inequality, some of the social and other issues. But Korea is a country that, maybe even more than the United States, is tied to the rest of the world, not only through trade, but through its geopolitical situation. He doesn't have that luxury of doing that. And he's going to have to be very focused on how does he first engage. I hope he gets that phone call soon and that the engagement begins. But it's not going to be easy.
So I think that what you all have laid out is that we're at a moment where it's almost nothing less than a renegotiation of the parameters of the relationship and a wide range of areas that have to be dealt with. And so I want to, as my transition question to our audience, I want to ask each of you to focus on some specific areas. I want to ask Ambassador Goldberg to start by talking about how best to handle the tariff negotiations, which of course is very complex because it's a very dynamic environment, changes from day to day in terms of what's going on with other countries, et cetera. So what is the right approach to trying to deal with this administration on that issue set? For Ambassador Harris, I want to ask about, he mentioned the tightrope earlier. So how do you recommend that Lee Jae-myung try to walk this tightrope between his desire to at least stabilize the relationship with China and the clear and perhaps rising pressure on Lee Jae-myung to adhere to and align with the United States, especially on China issues? And then for Ambassador Stephens, I want to return to your comments about essentially North Korea policy with the NIS Director Lee Jung-suk. We know that President Trump has an interest in that issue, that he probably conceives of it in bilateral terms. How do you expect the Lee Jae-myung administration to position itself in terms of outreach and relationship to President Trump's desires to reconnect with his old summit partner, Kim Jong-un? So let me start with Ambassador Goldberg.
Well, tariffs is a tough one, Scott, because so much happens on a daily basis in terms of the policy changing or pronouncements here made by President Trump about what he's going to do, moving to 50% on steel, for example, just in the last few days, something that will affect South Korea, which provides about 9% of U.S. steel. But I think if you look at the two countries that have had the most impact, and of course they're two of our largest trading partners, Canada and Mexico, they've stuck to their guns basically, and that have applied or talked about reciprocity in different ways. And in the case of South Korea, it may come into play also some of the other issues like SMA, the Special Measures Agreement, burden sharing, about how much they'll be paying in that, if it's a holistic kind of negotiation. Shipbuilding, which is an area that can be very positive in terms of Korea's ability to help the U.S. Create new ships for the Navy. Those kinds of issues that will be of interest to the U.S. Will be what's important. There are ways to handle Oval Office visits, as we've seen, some more successful than others. There's an example just from yesterday. The Chancellor of Germany tried to show areas of cooperation and agreement rather than disagreement. We all can go back a little ways to remember the President Zelensky visit where it was more combative. So there are ways to handle that publicly that may be helpful in approaching this issue and the other issues that you've asked about. But tariffs will be the first issue, I think. And so that will kind of set the environment for the others as well, if in fact they are disaggregated and it's a discussion just of tariffs or not.
Ambassador Harris?
Yeah, so I'll talk about the tightrope that you mentioned that President Lee is going to have to manage between the United States on the one side and China on the other. So when I was there, and I'm sure it was the same with Ambassador Goldberg and Ambassador Stephens, we're often asked the question, are you asking us being the Koreans, to choose between the United States and China? I always maintained that was a false narrative. The question itself is a false narrative because South Korea did make a choice already, and they chose the alliance with the United States in 1953, and we're going to celebrate the 72nd anniversary of that alliance later this year. So let's be clear, South Korea has made the choice. That said, they still have to have a relationship with China, and that's the challenge. I've already mentioned what's happening in the West Sea. That's an immediate challenge to South Korea. Taiwan is also a key issue that will come to play during President Lee's term, and that will certainly test his theory of pragmatism. And I think that we'll see strategic ambiguity play out with South Korea, just like it does with us. And they'll try to emphasize strategic ambiguity with regard to Taiwan and the expectations from both the United States and China regarding that issue. Then we'll see the issues of the nuclear ambitions that many people in South Korea have with regard to their own nuclear weapons development, and whether they go forward with that in the face of the existential threat I already mentioned from North Korea, as well as the Washington Declaration, which emphasized the extended nuclear deterrence that we would extend to South Korea. So against all of those backdrops, he'll have a challenging way ahead.
Ambassador Stephens?
Yeah, I'll be pretty brief about this. I mean, I think with respect to North Korea, I my sense is that there's a recognition across the political spectrum in South Korea that the situation has changed in many ways, and given the DPRK's current approach, which is we're no longer even thinking about reunification from the North Korean perspective. We have a new connection with Russia, and a very important one, and renewed trade and contact with China. North Korea itself may not be all that interested in a revised engagement policy, even from a new government in Seoul. Certainly, I think there will be efforts to see if something might be possible. But I think the other thing that the new Lee administration will be looking at is where, in particular, President Trump is on this. And certainly if President Trump decides he wants to pursue something, there'd be interest in that, but there'd also be worry that the dreaded Seoul passing, that Seoul be left out of this, and this become a Washington-Pyongyang connection is, I think, the worst nightmare of really any government in Seoul, whatever party they're from, and they would be very, very sensitive to that and want to be proactive in staying on top of that. So definitely, I think that's something to watch. At the same time, I guess I would add, because defense is a part of it too, that President Lee and his government, I think, will be committed, as previous ones have been, including Moon Jae-in, to strengthening and ensuring its defense posture. There is anxiety across the political spectrum, I think, in South Korea about this notion. You mentioned strategic ambiguity, but the other strategic is the strategic flexibility, and this whole question of where would the burden lie, if you like, in terms of defending South Korea against what is still recognized, again, across the political spectrum as a real and present danger from the North.
Okay. Well, I think we've only scratched the surface in terms of all the issue sets, which I actually think is an evidence of just how comprehensive the relationship is. But I want to turn to our audience for questions. I have a few more. In fact, I could probably go another couple of hours, but let's call on the audience. I see a couple of hands. Let's start right here in the middle.
Michael Macetic, PBS Online NewsHour. On the trilateral agreement, first of all, Ambassador Goldberg, you know right up close how much energy the Biden administration spent trying to put that together. And Ambassador Stephens mentioned the Democratic Party moving more to the center, but the main opposition to any kind of reconciliation or agreements with Japan in the past has come from the left. And so how do you envision the future of the trilateral agreement? Also, because both Japan and South Korea at the moment may both feel they're being slapped around by President Trump on the tariff questions.
Ambassador Goldberg?
Which may very well bring them a little bit more together because of a shared interest in the economy. You are correct that traditionally the Democratic Party or the progressive forces in Korea have been more resistant to Japan and cooperation with Japan because of the historical issues. And those historical issues could come back in some form, whether they are geographic, UNESCO sites, whatever they are. You know, the trilateral existed, at least in form, not very much in substance, before the Biden administration. It was the Biden administration that was able to put it together, but it was the result of President Yoon's outreach to Japan. It was his very bold political move to do that. Absent that, the whole thing would not have come together, the trilateral and the Camp David agreements, as they did. I agree with Ambassador Stephens that the pragmatic Lee Jae-myung will want to continue that trilateral and at least reap some of the benefits of it, whether they're economic or strategic. But it's going to be difficult given his political party and what might arise in terms of irritants politically because of the historical issues. But I think the very importance of the trilateral is evident to Koreans at this point. It's more and more accepted by the population. I think they're used to traveling to Japan again and buying Japanese products. So it's become a little bit more normalized, which makes it a little easier for Lee Jae-myung.
Ambassador Harris, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I'll just add to what Ambassador Goldberg said is, look, leaders lead. And that's what former President Yoon and former Prime Minister Kishida did. Despite overwhelmingly low poll numbers on the issue of bilateral relationship between Tokyo and Seoul, they both forged ahead to build the bilateral relationship, which underpins the trilateral relationship. So leaders lead, and I think that President Lee will do the same, certainly based on his campaign rhetoric and his inaugural speech.
If I could just add, I think it also remains to be seen how much of a priority the trilateral relationship, which is very much a signature accomplishment of the Biden administration, will be to the current administration in Washington. And I think it is important, as Ambassador Harris suggested, to think there is an important bilateral relationship here too. It's not always about us, although we figure very largely in this. And as Ambassador Goldberg already mentioned, public opinion has really changed on this in years, right? And so the positive attitudes among Koreans towards China have gone way down over the last decade plus, and they've gone up towards Japan. I think that is very important. Yes, you need to lead, but you need to have, you do worry about public opinion, and it's changed dramatically, and I would say, perhaps in a sustained fashion, given the geopolitics that we're in. With respect to, to what someone from the Democratic Party does, I think it is notable that Kim Dae-jung, when he came to power in 1997, and I think in some ways, if I could say, he might be a good model for Lee Jae-myung in some ways. He made historic progress in improving the relationship with Japan. And he came to power at a time of crisis when he tried to reach across the ideological divides, not always completely successfully, but when it came to foreign policy and the alliance and relations with Japan, he did that very, very skillfully. And he certainly is regarded as the leader from the Democratic Party who did so much, and I think in many ways he would offer some good lessons for the new administration.
I'd just add, though, he did at the time get an apology from the Japanese, and I just wanted to give a concrete example of where I think you're right, Kathy, about the change in mood. When the DP tried to use the Fukushima water release issue as a huge issue in the relationship between the two countries, they basically failed.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got, do we have some online questions? No? Okay. Then right here, we've got two questions right next to each other, so why don't we take those together?
I'm Joshua Park, the South Korean Navy retired captain and affiliate faculty at George Mason University. First of all, thank you for this very timely event hosting by KEI. I have one question simply, but I'd like to ask the mere perspective of American side, U.S. side, rather than Korean newly government. My question is, what's the current U.S. foreign policy's difficulties? Simply, what kind of worry or concern you have with regard to current U.S. foreign policy? The second question is, with that context, what kind of expectation do you want from South Korea's new government? Thank you.
Okay, and right next to you, let's take those together, yes.
Hi, thank you so much again for this great discussion. And my name is Nari Miura. I'm with the consultant firm based in Seoul as well, and Tokyo and Taipei. My question is, one of the foreseeable Trump tariff that is still kind of pending is the tariff on the pharmaceuticals. And I would like to ask the ambassador's potential outlook or the implications that would impose on South Korea and this new Lee administration? Thank you.
Okay, so pharmaceutical tariffs and the question of what does the U.S. really want from its allies in today's world. Does anybody want to take those?
I think in the Asia context, we've already discussed that the real focus is on China. And so what the Trump administration, people at the White House, people at the Pentagon also who support President Trump, will be looking for is a more aligned policy, as was the case with President Yoon on China. And that's what's going to be the difficult maneuver for President Lee, how to exactly try to stabilize relations with China at the same time that they pay attention or respond to that Trump administration desire for a more aligned policy on China. And it's something they're asking of Japan as well, and every other country in Asia. And this, they may have a very receptive audience in the Philippines, where the South China Sea issue and American forces are welcomed again under the rotational forces agreement, EDCA. But this is going to be a real challenge for President Lee, how to handle those two, in some ways, competing ideas.
I don't have an answer on the pharmaceuticals question specifically. Maybe Ambassador Harris does, but I think what Ambassador Goldberg had to say about tariffs in general is kind of where we are. That I think it is kind of first, if you like, on this to-do agenda is to get some clarity around some of these issues for all of our sakes. And hopefully with the new government in Seoul, there can be and with the proper response in Washington, and a lot of responsibility lies here, we can have that. Your question, I guess you were saying, don't ask me what I think about foreign policy in the United States, what should we do? But I do have this reflection, I guess, and I obviously don't speak for the Trump administration at all. In fact, I'm going to say something that's going to be a bit critical, I think. And that is, I do think that U.S. foreign policy and U.S. leadership is best served when it has several pillars, and certainly our military strength and our economic strength is a part of it. But we have other pillars too, and actually, when it comes to economic strength, I don't consider that soft power. That's hard power. But you get into the hard power, soft power, and what I'm trying to say here is, I think that this administration doesn't have a place for what is Joseph Nye, the late Joseph Nye, called soft power. And I mourn the fact that we are making it so difficult for foreign students to study here. And I think that has a big impact on our the underpinnings of our relationship with an important ally like Korea, where Korea has continued to send per capita more of its children abroad to study in the United States than any other country. That would be a terrible loss. We have programs that subsidize this for people who don't have money to come. It's called the WEST program. These are all kind of small things, but I think they're very important. And I think this is where actually South Korea, coming out of this election, out of this very difficult time, at a time where worldwide, I think we feel many of our democracies and principles are under pressure, and our institutions feel like they're weakening, that Korea offers a positive example. And a positive example of a variety. And I'm not just, now we can talk about K-pop or K-culture or whatever, but there's the immigrant community here. Things that are really being, I think, debated in a very destructive way in the United States in many ways. And Korea as an ally, and not only because of our shared experience, but very importantly in the founding of the Republic of Korea and all that's happened, but because of what Korea has built over the years, that Korea as an ally offers a kind of soft power to the sort of alliances that we need in Asia to counter China, to lead in the world, that right now I'm afraid the United States is falling a little bit the wrong way in. So I would really emphasize not just the hard power of trade and ships and chips and investment and all of that, but all that comes with it too. that Korea is almost uniquely placed, I think, in Asia to be an exemplar of the importance of those things in maintaining ties and then strengthening them.
Thank you. We've got another question. We got a couple more questions here. So let's go over here first, and then also 3 questions. We've got 3 questions in 10 minutes. So I'm going to just collect those 3, starting right here, and then we'll the ambassadors will answer as best they can.
Hi, so my name is Terrence Matsuo. I'm a non-resident fellow here at KEI. Thank you so much for this great panel. Really quickly, so under the Yoon administration, Korea didn't really get involved with Ukraine, but did step up its cooperation with NATO and also began promoting its arms industry in Eastern Europe. And so I was just curious if the panel had any ideas on kind of the future of Korea's relationship with Europe. Thank you.
Okay, that's a good question. Now let's come over here to, just pass the mic. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Wonchul Kim from Hangare Daily. And by the way, they have a talk over the phone for 20 minutes while you guys are talking.
Oh, okay. Thank you for the update. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have 2 questions.
I said they'd be talking well when I was talking.
I have 2 questions. The personal chemistry especially matters a lot to Donald Trump. So do you have any opinion about the personal chemistry between the 2 leaders? And my second question is there any possibility for Donald Trump administration to use the Washington Declaration as a bargaining chip? Thank you.
Okay, and if you can pass the mic back to the lady, and that's going to unfortunately be our last question.
Hello, my name is Ju Young-hong from Seoul Daily, Seoul Times, based in Seoul, and my question is to Mr. Ambassador Harris. Nice to see you again, and thank you for inviting us Korean journalists to Habib House during your term. So, during President Trump's first term, you personally witnessed tensions between the U.S. and South Korean governments over issues such as inter-Korean relations and Korea-Japan relations. Are you seeing a risk of similar friction recurring under Lee administration with your sense of personal experience? And at the time, there were patient and skilled experts in the Trump administration to mediate the conflicts, but do you think still we have this kind of safeguards in the Trump administration?
Okay, why don't I go to Ambassador Harris to answer that question, and then we also have the questions about Europe and chemistry. So, Ambassador Harris.
So let me answer that question about safeguards and Washington Declaration, and I'll also give a little bit on Europe in response to the ROK Navy captain's question on U.S. expectations of the ROK. So on the question of are we going to see the same challenges with the second Trump administration that we saw in the first Trump administration? Well, that's kind of dependent on Lee Jae-myung, right? He is far more pragmatic, in my opinion, than Moon Jae-in. And so that pragmatism, I think, will be very important in dealing with the second Trump administration. Less ideological, more pragmatic, I think will be the key. So with regard to the safeguards, I think there are certainly experts in the second Trump administration that are knowledgeable about Korea once they're confirmed. For example, Allison Hooker at the who's been nominated, I think, or will be nominated to be the Undersecretary of State for Policy. She's spectacular, and I think that'll go a long way. Former ambassador to Thailand, Michael Desambre, to be the Assistant Secretary for East Asia in the East Asia Bureau, a superb individual, well-versed in Asian issues. I think he'll be terrific and will provide great guidance. With regard to the question of Europe, and this goes back to the ROK Navy captain's question also on expectations. So I haven't read it. I haven't seen it because it's classified, but I have seen the unclassified media reporting of it, and that's the interim National Defense Strategic Guidance, and it outlines to me clearly what U.S. Objectives are, and in that you can read what expectations of our allies are. China is the focus area. We're going to move our focus from Europe to the Indo-Pacific, and we're going to ask for increased contributory support from our allies and partners in the region. So I think that's pretty clear. Though it itself is classified, you can read the unclassified reporting of it. So I'll stop there and leave the questions of chemistry to those who might have an answer. I don't.
Okay, let me go with Ambassador Stephens first, and then Ambassador Goldberg, you can wrap us up.
All right. Yeah, I don't, I mean, on the question of chemistry and establishing a relationship between President Trump and President Lee, I mean, I think what Phil said earlier is about, as far as I could go, with good advice, and maybe I'm paraphrasing by saying when it comes to the kind of settings that these summits seem to be in, which is a very large public component and then a private component, I mean, to keep the public in certainly a do no harm and keep things positive and hope to deepen a relationship, you know, both at the personal level, but also, and this goes to what Harry's talking about, to try to build the kind of consultations which have been a feature. Yes, the leader is important, but have been a feature of the alliance for all these years, not only in the security area, but in the trade area and everywhere else, to try to develop those relationships. I think it's uniquely perhaps difficult right now, I mean, given the unorthodox nature of the Trump administration and the long kind of interregnum in Korea as it's gone through its political process. But I think that's an important priority. And with respect to Europe, yeah, Phil, you're well placed to make a much more expert reply. But I think it's a very important relationship and will get even more important. And certainly out of the last several years, it's quite extraordinary. You know, we tend to focus here in the U.S. on all the Korean investment in the United States, and I guess I should mention that too. I think that's another important part of the relationship that gives it sustenance. That is a way of establishing chemistry. Maybe even if you can say, look at all these factories being built, look at all these things we're doing. You know, not emphasize so much the fact that maybe it started a little bit earlier, but a little bit of rebranding, you know, but it's politics and diplomacy, I guess. But with respect to Europe, yeah, also, I mean, look at Korean investment in Europe, particularly in the defense industry. I mean, these extraordinary relationships is developing in Poland and elsewhere. So I think both that in the context of those business relationships and also in the context of multilateral organizations, whether Korea is a member or not, that engagement, which the Yoon administration did do, is certainly something that's going to be equally important, I think, or more important going forward.
Well, in terms of chemistry, we're in real time, we have a chemistry experiment going on. And you'll see the results very soon in Truth Social message, as well as the readouts from both sides, how the conversation went. And this is the first interaction between the two, and we'll see how it goes. Whether it is a substantive conversation or just a protocolary kind of discussion about congratulations. It's hard to know what that relationship will be like, and we'll see as it progresses. As for Europe, I think Kathy is right. Korea has huge interest, especially in business and commerce in Europe. With Ukraine, it's an interesting case because we and I were very much involved in trying to get the Yoon administration more active on the Ukraine issue, and they became more active over time, and they responded to the Biden administration's requests for more help for Ukraine, some of which was apparent in humanitarian and reconstruction assistance promises, but also in the military area. So they were responsive. In some ways, I think the new administration in Seoul will be let off the hook a bit because there's no longer that expectation or pressure from Washington, as far as I can see. We ourselves, while continuing some assistance, especially on the intelligence side, are not doing the same kind of worldwide attempt at helping Ukraine that was going on during the Biden administration. But that's specific to Ukraine. In terms of Europe as a whole, Poland and the other Eastern European countries as big customers for the arms industry in Korea, it will be important. And you know, these are the business relationships and a kind of traditional Korean foreign policy based on those kinds of interests, whether it's in Europe or the Middle East, the Gulf, and other places.
All right, we've come to the end of our time, but I have one last question that I want to sneak in here, and that is, in his inauguration speech, Lee Jae-myung mentioned more aspects of K impact on the world than I think I've ever heard up to now. And so my question for each of the ambassadors is, what do you think is going to be the next big K product that will have upside opportunities for growth on the global stage? Kathy, why don't we start with you?
Oh, I didn't read that in the speech.
He had a lot of K items.
He had a lot of K items.
Yeah, K democracy, K food, K drama.
Right. I know. I should know something like that.
Well, I was relying on you because I thought you would. You're usually on the front end of this.
All right,
So.
As I was departing Seoul, I added one more K-dash, and it's K-beauty. All of the products, they ran Sephora basically out of Korea because of the popularity of Olive Young, and it seemed to me, tourist that was coming into Seoul was looking for those products. So that's become famous as well.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Now I'm going to give you a moment to catch my breath. That's good. And I don't know if he mentioned in his speech, but I guess the theme of this is in a refreshed way or a kind of a new way for most of the world, K democracy.
Okay, it is one thing you mentioned.
So I'll add one.
Yeah.
K weapons.
K weapons.
So,
Thanks, Adam.
look, Korea's in the top 10 weapons exporters in the world now. And they have aspirations to be the number 4 weapons exporter by 2030 or so. Well, that's on Lee Jae-myung's watch. And so I think the quality of the weapons they're already selling, you know, they just announced a massive fighter deal with the Philippines. Their howitzer is a global standard now, and with the potential for shipbuilding and maintenance and repair of American ships in Korea. I think that's an aspiration that's reachable. So for me, K weapons is the next K product.
Okay, well, with that, I'm going to wrap us up. I want to thank our 3 ambassadors for their excellent contributions to the discussion, and we'll all be anticipating how things play out with the launch of the Lee Jae-myung administration. Thank you all for coming, and please give our panelists a round of applause.
Thanks, guys.